Pros, save more on the materials you need to get the job done, inside and out, at Lowe's. Right now, get 10% off in-stock Trex Naturals decking, now available in more styles. Plus, get 15% off select custom entry, interior, and storm doors. Then, we'll deliver it all straight to your job site to help keep your jobs moving. Get the brands pros trust, priced right, and ready when you need them. Our best lineup is here at Lowe's. Valid through 5/27. While supplies last. Selection varies by location.
Coming up on the Threat Status podcast, we talk to Sampriti Bhattacharyya, the CEO of Navier, an advanced tech maritime transport company, about how the U.S. should think about naval dominance in the 21st century, the importance of dual-use commercial and military capabilities, and her company's electric flying boat that was on display at the annual U.S. Special Operations Forces Convention in Tampa, Florida. Ben Wolfgang has been on the ground all week at the convention, where he gives us the latest on the relevance that forces like the U.S. Army Green Berets, the Delta Force, and the Navy SEALs have for the American military globally. We'll also dive into Russian President Vladimir Putin's visit to China, the ongoing dissolution of nuclear non-proliferation treaties, and the current status of the so-called CRINKS, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea alignment. Don't forget to go to WashingtonTimes.com and sign up for the daily Threat Status newsletter. Hello and welcome to the Threat Status Podcast. I'm Guy Taylor, National Security Editor here at the Washington Times. I'm hosting this week's episode because regular host Ben Wolfgang has spent this week scrambling on a field reporting assignment at the 2026 Special Operations Forces Convention, SOF Week, in Tampa, Florida, and he's joining us from the convention where he's interviewed a slew of folks in the SOF community and been tracking all sorts of advanced defense tech developments tied to the event. Ben, what is happening? Give us a breakdown of your experience there.
Yeah, Guy, it's been a really incredible week down here at SOF Week in Tampa, Florida, Special Operations Forces Week. Longtime listeners of this show, I think, will probably know that I've been coming to SOF Week for a while. I think this is my fifth or sixth time here, and I've had interviews on this podcast that I've done at SOF Week ever since the early months of this show, and we have one coming up later on this episode, of course, with Sampriti Bhattacharyya of the company Navier. But I think what's really jumped out to me, Guy, this year at SOF Week that maybe makes it a little bit different than years past is this just across the board realization from just about everybody you talk to that Special Forces, those elite military units like the Green Berets or Delta Force or Navy SEALs, among others, are now sort of a tool or a piece that's equally important, and some would argue even more important than any kind of traditional military forces that we had, including traditional assets like tanks or manned planes and of course, personnel as well. And the reason for that is just the changing nature of warfare, right? We've detailed on this show before one of the reasons that President Trump, for now at least, as we record this, decided against sending the 82nd Airborne or Marine Corps units into Iran, onto Iranian shores, is that he got some really sobering projections about the casualties the U.S. might take from, among other things, Iranian drone swarm attacks against American positions. Special Forces advocates will tell you that you run into even bigger problems trying to mass forces, including human military personnel, anywhere in the Pacific in the event of a clash with China. Then you look at, by contrast, the U.S. pulled off that really incredible raid back in January to capture Nicolas Maduro from his compound in Caracas, Venezuela. Special Forces carried that out. Now, of course, traditional military capabilities played a big role. So did cyberspace. Across the board, it was an integrated mission on an almost unprecedented scale. But it was Special Forces that actually got Maduro out. And whether you agree or not, getting him out was a key national security priority for the U.S. and a military objective that the Trump administration set out. And Special Forces was the avenue, the capability that was able to accomplish that. So you kind of look at it through that lens and then take a step back and you listen to Admiral Frank Bradley, the head of U.S. Special Operations Command, saying from the stage here at SOCOM that Special Operations Forces, one of their big roles, their overarching role now, is to prevent a major great power war. And he means a potential war with China, of course. And in other words, the focus now is how do you leverage these elite special forces units in combination with the incredible technology on display here at SOF Week, from drones to AI to flying boats that we'll hear about later in the show and other things? How do you kind of couple all that and then use it in combination with elite special forces units to achieve specific and more narrow military goals that in turn make the U.S. safer and advance our interests around the world? Now, look, that's not necessarily a new concept for special forces, of course. They've been doing that for decades, but I think it's just more important now and maybe more in the forefront now because there's widespread agreement, I think, that a lot of those more traditional military pieces on the chessboard, like major detachments of ground forces to the Mideast or theoretically into the Pacific, are just going to be a lot less appealing now, because of long-range artillery, because of drone swarms, electronic warfare, cyber, space capabilities, robotics. All of that, makes it easier for adversaries potentially to target traditional U.S. forces in the way that we've known them, for decades and even in the post-9/11 era. So I think that some of those new calculations are really on display here, and certainly with the Mideast war in Iran, we're seeing those calculations kind of front of mind for all decision makers. And that's, I think, kind of one of the big overarching themes that you're hearing everybody talk about, both from the stage and kind of just in hallway and hotel lobby conversations this week here at SOF Week in Tampa.
It's really interesting stuff, Ben. I'm glad that you're down there this week. I hope listeners will check out your reporting on the threat status pages at the Washington Times. For my own part this week, there are several things I'm tracking. One of the big ones was the visit by Russian President Vladimir Putin to Beijing for a summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Putin scrambled to make the trip just days after U.S. President Donald Trump visited the Chinese capital a week ago. If the optics of the Trump-Xi summit were generally positive, the subsequent Putin-Xi summit was an all-out love fest. The two authoritarian leaders of Russia and China went to lengths to publicly celebrate the growing strategic ties between Beijing and Moscow. They also hailed the growing energy trade between Russia and China at a moment when both are feeling the shocks of disrupted Iranian crude oil from the U.S.-Israel war that's ongoing on Iran. Obviously, we're tracking the prospect of renewed U.S. strikes on targets inside Iran and whether or not this very tentative ongoing ceasefire lasts through the weekend here. Why does all this matter, though, with regard to the Putin-Xi summit? Why does it matter in the grand scheme of great power geopolitics? Here's why. With Putin in Beijing, the vitality of the informal authoritarian CRINKS alliance, that's China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, was on full display. And here's a key point. The fact that Putin went to China rather than having Xi travel to Moscow underscored the outsized role that China has as the kind of deep-level king of the CRINKS. China's role in the alliance is crucial, given that Beijing is the top buyer of Iranian crude oil, is tacitly supporting Russia's war against Ukraine, and has really supplanted Moscow in the post-Cold War era as the most powerful backer of Kim Jong-un's authoritarian regime in North Korea. Interestingly, Ben, all while this Putin-Xi meeting was happening, Russian military forces launched their biggest nuclear forces exercises in years this past week. Also interesting is that the U.S. Air Force test-launched an unarmed Minuteman III ICBM, that's an intercontinental ballistic missile, from Vandenberg Space Force Base in Southern California on May 20. The Pentagon said the test was not in response to any world events, but the timing is critical. If only that all of these things are happening less than 4 months after the collapse of the U.S.-Russia Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, commonly known as the New START Treaty, an agreement that had kept watch over the proliferation of nuclear weapons around the world, let alone the dangerous ICBM vehicles capable of delivering those weapons to every inch of the planet. That treaty is essentially dead. Will there be a new non-proliferation movement and regular discussions between the U.S., Russia, and China? Let's hope so.
And we are joined now by Sampriti Bhattacharyya, the founder and CEO of Navier, next generation company creating zero-emission marine vessels. And we have a lot of people with some incredible resumes that come on this podcast, but I think yours is really one of the best and one of the most unique. Harvard, MIT, you worked at NASA, and now you're at the cutting edge of what I think is kind of one of the most important and also just, frankly, the coolest sections sort of the SOF world of the U.S. national security landscape. And we're doing this here at SOF Week 2026 in Tampa Bay, and we're actually recording on a boat right now. So this is a first, I think, for the Threat Status podcast. We've recorded in a lot of interesting locales, hotel lobbies, I think in a tank once, but never on a boat. So Sampriti, what are we on right now? Explain to listeners who obviously can't see this thing, but what is this boat?
Well, so first of all, Ben, thanks for hosting me. And so you are, I guess I'm hosting you on the boat.
True.
We are on the N30 Pioneer. So this is one of the first production vessels that you're on, and it is a 30 feet, all electric hydrofoiling boat. It's America's first hydrofoiling commercial boat that is out there, and it's the longest range electric boat in this category, so 75 nautical miles range.
Okay, so the hydrofoiling, explain what that is for listeners who might not know.
Yes, so you can think about it as a boat that flies. What that means is that this is a boat which has wings underwater. So when you look at the boat, you see there are two independent motors, and underneath it there are two wings. And then there is a front wing as well. So what happens is, just like an airplane, you start moving, and when you reach a certain speed, you lift off. I mean, air and water are both fluids, and so they act kind of similar, except the density of air and density of water is greater. So you don't need giant wings. Even with relatively smaller wings, you can lift up this 5,000-pound boats up in the air, 4.5 feet above the water. So you're above all the weights. And it is 90% more efficient than a traditional gas boat.
Yeah, I was going to ask what some of the advantages are of hydrofoiling.
So, because boats are really inefficient. I mean, they use all the energy to push water. So when you get the boat out of the water, it's super efficient. And it doesn't matter. I mean, whether that's a gas boat or electric boat, it's just the physics of it. You're becoming efficient by getting the boat out of the water. Electrification adds a little bit more multiple to that efficiency, but whether it's diesel or it's gas or it's nuclear or it's electric, does not matter. It's just the hydrofoiling itself is just eliminating that extra what we call the drag tax.
Yeah. So what are some of the advantages of the electric power? I mean, is it just a matter of not having to worry about fuel limitations, or are there other advantages to having the electric power component?
So I would say that we build both hybrid and electric boats, and it totally depends on the kind of mission that you need it for. For many of the transportation options, people like the electric boat. It's much more 10 times more energy efficient than a traditional gas boat. I mean, a gas is costing you $5 per nautical mile, and electric is 20 to 30 cents. So it's a big cost difference there. But also electric motors are super easy to maintain. And those are the two big ones for electric. Now, hydrofoiling, as I said, one is efficiency, no seasickness, and the other thing you might have noted, there was no wake behind the boat. And if you are in hybrid, you have the ability to switch. Like, you can go to a destination, let's say, using your diesel mode, and you can switch to electric when you need it to, if you want, if you're in a mission that requires you to be quiet.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I want to get into that in just a second here, but I want to zero in on the environmental aspect of this, because you mentioned sort of particularly with the cost of fuel right now is out of control. So the electric aspect of that's appealing in that way. But do you get the sense that people who, potential customers of yours who are going to use this boat, do they care about the environmental aspect? I'm an old environmental and climate change reporter, and we've had kind of this seesaw in administrations in terms of climate change and environmental policy from one administration to the other. Do you get the sense that the folks in the national security community in the military, do they care about that? Do they care about fuel costs, climate change, emissions, any of that stuff?
So it depends on the customer segment. So if we are talking about it is, what I say is like, you build a boat that fits the function, and that should always be the most important thing. I don't think you should do something that is not important to the main mission, right? Just for a label, just for anything,
that would compromise the mission,
yes,
right?
I think your mission should always come first, and even that is true for transportation, right? Even if this boat was electric and you were like going at a range where I was like, you know what, it is a little too range inefficient, I would not want to risk it. I would be probably the first one to say that, hey, you might want a range extender with a genset, right? So I believe you should always have the best platform for your use case. If it's electric, and electric, meets the use case for transportation. I mean, if a hotel or a place could become electric, and where they're on the water, they need to move their passengers around, and they could afford it in terms of range, sure, they should go electric. But when we are talking about national security, I think the choice should be based on hierarchy of needs. The hierarchy of needs should be, number one, how do we become successful in this mission? But to your point, I think as we are looking at the broader picture, that hey, we are looking at an age of asymmetric warfare, where we are seeing that there's all these low-cost vessels, right? The cumulative cost of the platforms is a thing. So when you have hundreds of vessels that cost, 1/5, let's say on the diesel electric, right? That's a lot of cost saving on the operational side of things.
Yeah.
So I would say that.
Yeah. Are we in the midst of a change in how we sort of think about maritime assets and how they're deployed? Because my colleague Guy Taylor recently did an interview with Admiral Caudle, the Chief of Naval Operations, and he talked about sort of the way he's kind of rethinking force packages that he deploys. That maybe I don't need to send an entire carrier strike group to accomplish a mission.
Right.
So, I mean, where are we with that? I mean, do boats like this and other capabilities that we have, do you think maybe sparking kind of almost strategic rethinks inside the military in terms of, wow, I can now look at this mission and how to accomplish it differently because of these new capabilities that I have?
Absolutely. And I think for a long time, in defense, we have had this kind of attitude, probably the more exotic it is, the more complex it is, the more cooler it is. But I think we are learning as we are looking at, at our adversaries, we are getting into this age of asymmetric warfare where people are like, getting this very low cost platforms very quickly and integrating weapon systems very quickly and able to produce. Whereas if we stay at our traditional way of doing things, then we cannot get things out. To get a product out, it takes years, right?
Yeah.
So if we really have to compete in the new world, as the world we see it, I think we have to step back and zoom out and ask ourselves, what do we need to do to win in this climate, right? But it's also very important, I think, it's to remember that there is a lot of conversation about, let's say, how do we build lots of boats and outnumber China or outnumber XYZ. I think it is important to stay grounded and think maybe it is not important to beat our adversary at their own game. We have to think about what America is really good at. Maybe it is about out-innovating your adversary rather than outnumbering them. And out-innovation is often starts from first principles. How can you build a much more capable vessel? So I'll give you an example. China can build a vessel at low cost, but when you look at, can you build a vessel that is low cost to build, scale, and operate? The operational cost is 70% of a vessel cost over the lifetime. So if you can build a vessel that wins at the intersection, which your adversary cannot win, because of course this is a much more advanced platform,
right?
That's how you win. If you can build a vessel that goes 3,000 nautical miles instead of 400, that means you can stay longer at a mission because you don't need refueling.
Yeah.
That's how you win.
Do you think, and maybe some of us in the media are guilty of kind of perpetuating this, but there is a quality versus quantity issue here. I mean, we read a lot about China has the quote unquote the biggest navy in the world because they've got the highest number of ships just by the raw numbers. But I'm not sure that's the right metric to be looking at in terms of naval dominance.
Yes and no, right? I mean, never underestimate the power of what we call smaller groups. So if there are enough of a swarm, it can take down a big thing. Like, I mean, if you think about the shy drones, right? I mean, that, 100 or 1,000 of them, I mean, even at $1,000 each or something, I mean, that can take down a carrier, and we know that. So there is power in numbers, and I'm not saying that we should back down from numbers. I think and going back, at Navier, what we are doing, we are building these generalized marine vessel platforms, and I was just telling that the way to enable volume is to be dual use, is to standardize these platforms. The more standardized these are, the more volume we are producing, therefore the cost automatically comes down. So that's very important. I mean, I understand there's a lot of interest right now in defense. Are you a defense tech startup? But we are going back to the same loop, defense only company. What we need to do is to think about, guys, how do we build generalized platform? Because more of these platforms we build, thinking of commercial use cases, that's how we drive down cost, because commercial use cases makes you ruthless about cost cutting.
Explain that a little bit, because I know I've heard DOW officials repeatedly be saying this in the Trump administration, that we want to embrace the commercial side of things. We want to work with companies that are doing work in commercial as well, and not just building a specific platform for a specific branch of the military or some specific mission. So why is that important? You said it makes you ruthless. Why? How is that?
Yeah, because in defense, the way funding works is that they have so much requisitions that you will spend many years just trying to satisfy this requisition and building something so exotic. When we started with commercial, I mean, we knew that we are going to be dual use, but let's build, again, as I told you about, it's better to strip everything down to the physics of it and then add layers as requirements, right? When you start with requirements and capabilities and everything as a hodgepodge, then you have these exotic things hard to replicate. But when you boil down, what's the purpose of a vessel? Yeah. The purpose of the vessel is to go most reliably out in the sea, carry your payload, right, in all sorts of conditions, and do that efficiently, do that at speed, and be able to go long ranges. So if you boil that down, after that you can say, well, you know what, I want this to have a little bit of low signature. Then you can think about, like, okay, the first part of the requisitions already gave you a boat with hydrofoils because that's the most efficient way, and so on. Now in the second layer you can say, well, I want it to be unmanned. Sure, we can integrate autonomy with it. I want it to have low signature. Let's figure out how the top of the boat should be like, right?
I don't want to put words in your mouth. It sounds like you're in favor of the way that this administration is going about kind of rethinking the requirements and procurement that we've done for years, which, as you said, I think kind of resulted in some of those very narrowly focused capabilities that can really only do one thing.
I think that is true. I mean, at least what they're saying. Now, the question is that, we need to see how much of that is actually getting implemented in practice. Because if you're in the Valley, everybody will tell you that be a defense tech startup. Oh, are you building defense tech? We will buy you. Aren't we going back to the same loop again, then saying defense specific? Yeah. Right? There's a bit of a contradiction there, right? They're saying that we want something that's commercial, but if you go to Silicon Valley, build a defense tech startup because there is money in defense. Now, that's like saying, hey, there's high margins, and right now build products because defense is like this infinite money. Yeah. But I think that that's where we need to resolve. Actually, we should say, for America to win, it is actually necessary for us to win comprehensively in our maritime capabilities. Be it fleets for merchant fleets, be it for our naval fleets, be it our water taxis, and be it our ferries. Our waterways have huge potential, underutilized potential of moving things. Yeah. And the way to win is like, how do we build scalable platforms across this and then use that for defense? Okay, let's close with this, because whenever I'm writing or hosting a podcast interview that has anything to do with maritime naval capabilities, it's Indo-Pacific and it's China-centric, of course, because that's where everybody's focus is, and if God forbid we end up in a clash there. So in terms of what you're working on here, what are some of the capabilities, which ship to shore, island hopping, things like that? What are the things that you're looking at specifically with an eye to that theater as you continue to develop your capabilities here? Yeah, so something that we are very excited about is the vessel that's going on the sea, in a couple of weeks for sea trial, and I think that will fundamentally change the naval warfare game. It's not an incremental increase of capabilities. It's a first platform, a hydrofoiling vessel that is 30 feet, over 2,000 nautical miles range, almost 3,000 actually, at speed, not at low speed, at speed. And what that allows us, that allows us to actually cross Atlantic unmanned, first of all. Imagine to compare it with another 30 feet vessel that has probably 400 nautical miles max. So we are not talking about 10-20% increase. We are talking about like 5x. So what can you do with a stable, super long range vessel? First of all, there's no mission that does not want a stable, long range. Who does not want a stable? Who does not want a long range, stable vessel out in the seas, right? If you see the Navy SEALs who are, on the ribs getting slammed by the waves, that's application. But think about ISR, counter UAS, having the payload that you just see there, having it able to target it so precisely with the stable, a platform is huge. And very specifically, we are also having bigger vessel platforms, which are the 60 and the 120 feet. And I think the future is not this massive aircraft carrier. In 120 feet, what we call a micro carrier, where it can be a drone launch and recovery platform.
Right.
It's a whole mini mothership essentially, but it's enough to host a dozen or more of drones, underwater vessels, and smaller vessels.
Yeah.
So one of the big breakthrough I think we will see with this kind of vessels that we have is in the contested logistics. It'll be a game changer. You can carry payload, you can do that at speed, med evac, ship to shore.
Right.
And in terms of special operations, you saw it, how quiet it is. You can, you're interdicting something, you're going for a stealth mission. It's the perfect fun. You can beach this boat. You can retract the foil, beach it quietly, and get it done. And there's no noise.
Right. First ever interview on a boat in the Threat Status Podcast. Sampriti Bhattacharyya, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
One exciting update before we get to our special Threat of the Week segment. Remember that Threat Status will be hosting Indo-Pac 2026 Naval Dominance, Shipbuilding, Autonomy, and Command and Control, a special forum event with panels and keynote speakers, U.S. lawmakers, Trump administration officials, and defense industry leaders all gathering at the U.S. Navy Memorial in Washington, D.C. for that Threat Status event, which is on June 24th. Find details at www.washingtontimes.com. And it is time now for Threat of the Week, our weekly segment here on the show where we identify a global security threat, whether it's here at home, domestically, or in some corner of the world. It could be geopolitical, it could be technical, it could be philosophical. The point is that it's a threat that we think is impacting or could impact U.S. national security. Ben, what do you have as your threat of the week?
My threat of the week is ubiquitous technical surveillance, or UTS. This is something I'll be exploring more in the Washington Times because I've talked to a number of people about it here at SOF Week, and Admiral Bradley, the head of SOCOM, actually mentioned it in his keynote address this week. UTS essentially refers to the digital footprints that everybody leaves behind these days because of the way we use our smartphones and all the various apps that share our location data and interests and travel plans and what we buy, what we eat, and who we talk to. But this can be a problem, of course, when you're talking about highly sensitive military missions. I think a lot of listeners probably remember the example just a couple months ago, back in March, when a French sailor accidentally revealed the secret deployment location of the Charles de Gaulle aircraft carrier because he was tracking his morning runs on a publicly available fitness app, which then uploaded his GPS data and revealed where he was on this aircraft carrier. So that's not the only example, of course. There are others. And it's really become a major concern for both special forces and the military and national security communities as a whole, because, what if China or another adversary gets their hands on some of this data that gives away the locations of individuals known or suspected to be members of the military or special forces, or maybe, intelligence agents. Can an adversary use that data to determine, they're on the move right now? They seem to be massing at a certain point. We see this asset in this location. What does that mean? Does that mean there's an operation coming? The U.S. is about to launch some kind of mission. Does that potentially put lives in danger? These are small pieces of the puzzle. I think that an adversary, especially one, helped by advanced AI that can analyze all this stuff in seconds and maybe kind of paint a vivid picture for them, could potentially use to undermine American military missions around the world. So that's something that needs to be guarded against. There are companies doing it, and it's a big priority for the Special Forces world, but right now, it's still my threat of the week.
Thanks, Ben. My threat of the week is that a dangerous strain of the Ebola virus is spreading rapidly in the African countries of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda. The strain has no specific treatment or vaccine. The World Health Organization is warning about it. Here in Washington, it seems like a far-off thing. But if the COVID-19 era taught us anything about globalization and disease, a far-off thing can very suddenly be right in everyone's faces and can change the whole world very suddenly. My threat is that global emergency health response funding has been slashed by wealthy governments around the world over the past year, including by the Trump administration here in the United States. Hopefully, this is not a perfect storm. And with that, a huge thanks to you, Ben Wolfgang, and an even bigger thanks to Sampriti Bhattacharyya, the CEO of Navier, for being the featured interviewee on this week's episode. And the biggest thanks of all to you, our listeners. Please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Share the podcast with all of your friends. I'm Guy Taylor. Thanks so much again from our entire team here at the Threat Status Podcast.